Good morning. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton with the West Virginia Coal Association, and I'll be your host for the next half hour's program. Joining me today in the studio is our new Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey. General Morrisey has been on the job about a year and a half now. It's hard to believe that year and a half has gone by so quick. General, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here today.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, it's great to be on your program, and I always enjoy talking about coal issues and how we can protect coal jobs in the state of West Virginia.
Well, I mentioned you're just a year and a half into a 4-year term, and boy, it seems like you've been around a lot longer than what you have. It's gone by extremely fast, and boy, you've just been a real player on the legal aspect of coal and energy issues within the state, and boy, that's just a welcome change over the past. But a number of issues I'd like to broach, like to get into here today, but maybe a good place to start would be, just to give the mic to you to allow you to say a few words about yourself, about the office, some of the things you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, Chris, I took office in January of 2013. It was the first time a Republican had actually taken office since 1933.
Wow.
It was also the first time an incumbent had lost on the Board of Public Works since 1896. So there were a lot of changes that occurred in 2012. Interestingly, one of the major reasons why I decided to run for Attorney General is because I was just really tired of all the federal overreach and the fact that West Virginia was not doing enough to take it on. I looked and I thought that the Attorney General's office should play a leading role in challenging the EPA and really redefining the relationship between the states and the federal government, kind of to restore a little bit of balance in the force. Part of the reason, Chris, that I was so interested in these EPA and these regulatory issues is because I'm a regulatory lawyer by training. I had actually practiced as a healthcare regulatory lawyer. I had been licensed over 20 years from the eastern panhandle of the state. And I thought that that new focus with the expertise on regulatory matters could really be a big asset for the Attorney General's office. So we've tried to be very involved in coal-related and EPA-related matters every step of the regulatory and the litigation process. And I think that's going to mean some very good things for West Virginia in the future.
Well, it's already met some good things. It has already been parlayed into some good things. I mean, we appreciate the assistance, and as I said a moment ago, I mean, you jumped right in, and Lord knows we need all the technical, all the legal assistance that we can mount because these are very serious and very threatening issues.
They are, Chris, and one of the things that we've tried to do is change the whole focus of the office, because at the beginning of my tenure, I tried to go out and hire some really talented lawyers who could help, that we could fight to protect West Virginia jobs. And here's basically what we did. We were able to recruit some really top-notch folks, some former U.S. Supreme Court clerks and other people who had been very successful in the private sector. And now whenever a regulation comes out, we review every line of every page of every document to make sure that West Virginia interests are protected. And what we've seen coming out of this EPA is so aggressive and so devastating for West Virginia. I thought it was important to put a few people on point to make sure that West Virginia interests were protected in a way that they haven't before. So now we have a lot of terrific lawyers, very involved in the process. Whenever a rule comes out, we closely analyze that, and then ultimately we submit comments, and then we're willing to file suit or submit amicus briefs to make sure that our state interests are protected.
It almost seems like through your leadership, the state attorney general's office is it's like a redirection, a reset, and you're doing things out of this office here that other attorney generals are doing and have been doing for some time around the countries.
Well, that's right. What we're trying to do is really have this office focus on ways to protect West Virginia jobs and really ensure that the rule of law is adhered to. And that just never happened in West Virginia before. Sometimes in the past, you'd get the governor to go to the attorney general and the AG kicking and screaming might agree to file suit. That's a lot different with us. We're trying to take a proactive leadership role to make sure that people know that West Virginia will be leading on coal-related issues. And what I've also tried to do is build up a relationship with a lot of other attorneys general across the country so that we can partner up on the things that matter. So if you submit a brief with just your name on it, certainly that's very helpful. But if you can put together something with 5, 10, 15, or 27 states the way we did in the Mingo-Logan case, hopefully that really makes a difference. And these are bipartisan coalitions where you're able to show that if half the states or just a significant number of the states really care about the particular EPA proposal at issue, then the agency and the courts will pay a lot more attention. So this is the first step of many to ensure that West Virginia leads on coal issues. It always should have in the past. It hadn't, but now we're going to.
Well, we're getting really good response out of our legislative leadership. The governor has been very active. His predecessor, former governor, now U.S. Senator Joe Manchin, was very responsive, didn't hesitate in playing a lead role.
Right.
And now we see the Attorney General's office joining in the fray from a legal and technical standpoint, and it's very complementary to the efforts of the governor, very complementary to the efforts of our legislature.
Well, when you're staring down the barrel of the EPA, which is literally trying to shut down coal-fired plants in West Virginia and across the country, you need to work as a team. And that means you have to put your ego aside. You want to work in a collaborative manner with the governor, with the legislature, with the various state agencies. And we've certainly tried to do that. Our office is always open to try to work together to do things the right way. And we don't care what political affiliation someone's at, because at the end of the day, these are coal jobs. They matter. I know in 2012, I spent an enormous time down in the coal fields. And I think that I really saw what people were going through, and we have to make sure that someone steps up and fights for their interest. And as I started to look at a lot of the regulations that the Obama administration was pushing out, I became really concerned that when it came to these arbitrary actions, that there wasn't enough strength coming out of West Virginia. That's why now, with a better partnership, if a governor and an attorney general and the senators and members of Congress all work together, you can do a lot more things. Because right now we're at the place where it's difficult to overturn things in Congress, so you have to literally resort to the legal system, the court system, in order to try to achieve some relief. That's certainly an important role that we're going to be playing.
Well, your efforts have not gone unnoticed. We get throughout the southern coal fields here regularly, and there's a lot of appreciation. There's a lot of mentioning of the work you're doing. So over the last year and a half, like I said, it seems like you've been around for a lot longer than just 18 months here, because people do note and take notice what you're doing, and they're very appreciative. I mean, the miners know you're fighting for them.
Right. Well, what I've tried to do is to give a little bit of hope to the coal miners and their families, because a lot of times after the president was reelected, and the president, of course, has been committed to really shutting down the coal industry in the United States, after he was elected, I think people really had a sense of despair. And my thought is that we need to give people a little bit of hope in this process. And here's what we do. By knowing that you have a state attorney general who's going to be so focused on these coal-related issues, and that you're going to be involved in every step of the regulatory process, and that you won't hesitate to file suit if necessary, that means that coal miners start to gain a little bit more confidence. It also means that people might consider still investing in coal, that the flow of capital will come back to West Virginia. What we have to look at and think about is we're not going to change the presidency until 2017.
That's right.
But we can gum up the works enough so that we can give confidence to people that there really is a future for coal. And anyone who says the opposite isn't looking at the facts. And there's still a lot of coal in the ground in West Virginia, and there's so much we can do. But we need to make sure that people know that there are folks that are fighting for them, and we're not going to win every case, but we're going to win our share of them, and we're going to make sure that the agency goes through all of their punches to make sure that they do things the right way.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we could go in almost whatever direction we want based on your last statement. But I'm struck by something you mentioned a few moments ago about building this multi-state coalition and getting support outside of West Virginia, for your work and the work that your office is doing.
Sure.
For instance, the most recent filing of comments for the new source performance standards. I know that you were successful in putting a coalition together and having 15, 16 other state attorney generals join you in those comments.
That's right, Chris. We worked together with another 15 states, and West Virginia and Nebraska took the lead in writing those, because we think that those new source performance standards really means bad things for West Virginia. It's amazing some of the things that the EPA puts into these rules, because they're trying to argue that there should be a standard of really technical feasibility, as opposed to what the law requires is that you have technology that could be adequately demonstrated to be sustainable on a commercial level.
Yes.
And if you look at the case law and you look at what's required under the rules, that you need to have reliability, reasonable reliability, reasonable efficiency, and also that the cost of these regulations can't be exorbitant. The EPA's rule fails on every one of those counts.
Wow.
So what we've been able to do is talk to other states about that, talk to a lot of our neighboring states, talk to people across the country, because they know that if it's bad for coal, eventually that's going to be replicated for other fossil fuels as well. And I think that's the key thing when you're putting these coalitions together. You want to make sure that you protect coal jobs and stand for the rule of law, but you have to also explain that this also could be problematic long-term for oil and natural gas and for public works projects as well. That's something that we really focused on in the Mingo-Logan case, the Supreme Court brief that we filed last year. I think that most people joined that brief because they were worried that if the government could take such arbitrary action, after you probably had one of the most robust environmental impact statements that had ever existed, if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere, and that was a real concern.
You know, that case, we might want to just spend a moment talking about that, because a lot of people still don't realize the ramification, and that is that if you have a lawfully issued permit to do business, the federal government, particularly this group of within EPA, can arbitrarily purport to remove that permit or veto it.
Well, that's right. What had happened in this case is that there was a retroactive veto of a permit that was already issued, and this had gone through the ringer for many, many years, and the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA went back and forth for a long period of time.
I think 5 or 6 years total, just doing all the background
at least,
analysis.
right? At least that. And then what happened is that the EPA came in and they issued this retroactive veto. We thought that was a real problem, and obviously then the state of West Virginia became engaged, the company became engaged, and we decided that we would put together a broad national coalition to really fight the EPA here. And while the case ultimately hasn't been heard by the Supreme Court, they decided to let it get remanded back to the district court. The value of the coalition that we built, I think, will stand the test of time. Because what we did is that we pulled together states from across the country. Of course, there were states that cared about mining interest, but there were also states that cared about oil and natural gas and public works projects. I mean, if you think about it for a minute, Chris, imagine if you're planning a dam. You're going to build a dam. West Virginia, for example, has hundreds of dams, and you're going to plan that years in advance. Maybe it's going to cost a couple $100 million. There'll be a lot of jobs involved. Well, people who are going to invest in that are going to think about the capital expenditures. And folks are not going to be willing to invest if they're worried that the rug is going to get pulled out from under them.
Oh, exactly.
So what we tried to do is talk to a lot of the states that had pending water projects, that had pending public works projects, and we were able to put this broad national coalition together, bipartisan in nature, And we also had mayors, municipalities, water districts, contractors, people across the political spectrum recognize that you have to have some certainty in the regulatory process. And that certainly was the principle that we pushed forward.
I suspect you don't have to go very far to find others that have been that have been pressured or grieved by actions of this EPA.
Well, it's a long list, certainly.
I mean, they've really been kind of a bully out there, and I think, you know, from state to state to state, you find certain industries, certain specific projects where this EPA has inappropriately encroached or imposed their will.
That's right, and it extends not just to the regulations, but to the permitting process as well. I know that I've had a number of discussions with some of the coal miners and the operators here in West Virginia, and they talked about how long it was taking to get their permits approved compared to the past.
Right.
And that happened, and then magically in 2012, it was a little bit better because it was an election year, but that's a real concern going forward, because especially here in West Virginia, we need to really rely on our energy resources.
Right.
Chris, we're the second, as you know better than I do, we're the second largest producer of coal in the United States and the third largest producer of energy. For West Virginia to reach her economic potential, we have to leverage our energy resources. And that's certainly something that I'm trying to do out of the West Virginia Attorney General's office, because the law permeates everything that we do. Because whenever you're involved in a regulation or interpreting law, the Attorney General's office should be involved. And so we're trying to line up, work with the right people, but to step forward so that energy could be an important part of our state's economic future. If we can just leverage our state's economic strength just a little bit more, then we could take advantage of our incredible geography. Chris, as you know, we're within 10 hours of probably about 180 million people. We have, we're competitive from a wage perspective, which means that we can actually lure the right type of jobs here to West Virginia. If we build on that, then we can start moving up. There's no reason why we should be 50th or 49th in these economic categories. We have a chance to really soar, and that's what I'm laser focused on in the Attorney General's office, because I think every state official should do his or her part to promote economic growth.
You know, a couple thoughts. First of all, back when this administration first took office, we had a backlog of permits and permit renewals that was unprecedented. And in many instances, there had already been multiple state and federal agencies signing off on these permits, only to find EPA was practically vetoing or simply just not approving any permits that were previously approved, or that other EPA administrations had simply waived their right to and you know, opportunity under the law to review. Corps of Engineers, Office of Surface Mining on both the state and federal level, our state DEP, all had signed off on many of these permits. So we were sitting here with well, we actually coined the phrase permitorium, because there was a moratorium on permits. In fact, there was a universe, a growing universe. That's been whittled down some, but there was a growing universe of almost 1,000 permits involved in mining that required some type of federal action that was just sitting in limbo. And that's just unacceptable.
Well, it really is, and especially if you're a hardworking business person, you're a coal miner, your job, your livelihood shouldn't be threatened because there's a change of administration, right? There should be some regulatory certainty, and I think that's what people really depend upon. The fact is that people look to this concept, the rule of law, and they think that everyone should be treated the same regardless of political affiliation or economic status or the type of industry that you're in. So, but that didn't happen when you had the change of administration. And the fact is, Chris, that we know during the 2008 campaign, the president was very clear that he said that he was going to make it very difficult or impossible to actually build new coal-fired power plants.
Basically said he was going to bankrupt any group, any company, any individual that attempted to build a new coal-fired power plant.
And through his actions, he's obviously trying to do that, obviously through the new source performance standards. But then, of course, you also have other regulations that are about to come out and are pending
Right.
for existing power plants as well. So this has been a president that's really had a bullseye on the state of West Virginia, and that's one of the major reasons why I ran. I thought if I could make a difference and if we could employ very serious strategies that West Virginia's never used before, we might be able to gum up the works a little bit, make it a lot tougher for the administration to finalize a lot of these rules. That's why I've spent so much time trying to work to partner up with a lot of other states and build these large coalitions, because I think we have to take a pragmatic strategy of how we get to 2017, because this president, of course, is never going to be friendly toward West Virginia energy interests.
Well, any effective strategy typically has three prongs to it. It has one just to try to build public support, and that's external communications and public relations, and you have to have a government, a legislative goal or
Sure.
aspect, and then you also have to have a legal aspect, and you have to exhaust
That's right.
your efforts and resources on all three fronts concurrently.
You do, and I think it's important also for the public to understand that while there's a direct impact on job loss in West Virginia, we're also looking at higher electric bills. If you look at some of the proposals out there, this new source performance standards, for example, if you're trying to push forward technology that's not available, you're going to likely see significant increases in your power bills. One of the things that I focused on for that new source performance standard comments is that the government was using as its example a plant in Mississippi, this
Yes.
Kemper plant. But people don't realize that there were $2 billion of cost overruns associated with that plant. If you take that to its next step, which is what's going to be the impact on ratepayers, it could be potentially severe. So this isn't just about jobs, it's also about higher electric bills potentially for a lot of West Virginians and Americans.
We've seen a lot of that already. We've seen increases in our household and industrial electric rates here over the past couple of years, and that's projected to basically to go to astronomical levels potentially based on the effect of these rules
Right.
and how they're ultimately impacted. The new source performance standards that come out under the governor's or under the president's plan, those rules all but guarantee that there will never be a
new coal-fired power plant.
plant built. And that's what's wrong with that. With that model, particularly here within the southeast, as we sit on top of all these coal reserves,
Right.
and coal is being burnt cleanly today.
Sure.
The technological developments that have been underway and placed on these plants have virtually removed every single particulate from the emissions. We're
Right.
dealing with carbon dioxide today,
Right.
and I think last time I checked, the U.S. is only responsible for about 3%
Right.
of the world's quantity of carbon dioxide that comes from coal-fired power plants.
Well, that's right, Chris. And if you look at what's happening in China and across the globe, they're moving forward at breakneck pace. And here we are, we're going with both hands tied behind our back when we have an opportunity to be the energy leader of the world.
Yes.
And coal can play such an incredible part of that. So I'd like to make sure that there is a possibility, that that there will be a future for coal-fired power plants, because we are moving forward aggressively with the right type of clean technologies, which I think could ensure that we have the clean air, the clean water that we, of course, need. This isn't a debate about whether there should be clean air or
No,
clean water.
absolutely not.
The fact is that even when we look at these regulations, we're focusing on all the legal deficiencies associated with the rules. I think a lot of people want to make sure that they have safe drinking water. I know all of us who went through what happened in Charleston back in January, we were acutely aware of that. We should have no tolerance for individuals that are going to compromise our water quality. But at the same time, we have to make sure that people know that these regulations have a real life impact on families in West Virginia, and not just on the coal miners, but a lot of the ancillary work that flows. If a coal mine shutters in a particular town, all of the other businesses associated with that town really struggle as well, because you're going to have many fewer dollars that are available to spend on those businesses.
We already have nationwide almost 400 coal-fired power plants that have been forced to close prematurely. Some of these were scheduled to close naturally here over the next few years. But because of the most recent round of rules and requirements being imposed on these plants, there's over 400. We've had a total of 6 plants which parlayed into 18 individual coal-fired generating units that have been forced to close here in West Virginia. And we're as equally concerned about the plants that close in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, or Ohio, because we send coal throughout every state here in the eastern part of the country.
Absolutely.
So, that's a real travesty that those plants have been allowed to be closed.
Well, and I think what we try to focus on, because sometimes there are various market conditions that occur, and that's difficult, at least for the Attorney General's office, to control. But where we come in is we look at different ways to make sure that the rules are done the right way. When the EPA issues a rule, it should be consistent with the law. And what we've seen time after time after time is that they're deviating from some of the original intent, say, of the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act. And so our job is to try to say, look, we're not Congress, and I'm not in the executive branch on the federal government side, but we can make sure that the federal government is going through and doing things the right way. I think that's where our role is in the process, and at least I think we're starting to do some of the right things here in West Virginia.
Well, we perhaps have one of the biggest challenges that is about to present itself here in the state with the proposal of the federal standards for existing power plants. Those will be issued this June here in just a week or two, and those are real troublesome. If they take the same pattern and contain similar provisions as the rules for new coal-fired plants, then this is a very serious issue.
It's a very serious issue, and one that we're going to be focusing on. As we discussed a little bit earlier, we were able to put 16 states on the comment letter that we submitted to the EPA. We think that's a good start. But the other thing that we did is that we wrote a letter to the EPA, and we just had one basic request. We said, so long as you're still considering what the legal standard should be for new source performance standards, why don't you wait and hold off and not issue the regulation for existing power plants? Because I don't know how you finalize, or I don't know how you announce the proposal for existing power plants until you figure out what the right technology and the right legal standards are for the new power plants. So that gets me a little bit concerned that there's this rush to judgment, and they're not willing to really get the science and the technology right. And there's no reason for us to rush. The fact is that you have to be deliberate. Otherwise, there's a real chance that all of these regulations could get overturned in the courts or just be held up in the courts for years and years.
Especially something this